Wasn't like 30 years ago or something like that. Just a couple of years ago, we have our Southern Conference Pastors Retreat or something like that. The little kind of, they call it a cabin, but it's more of a dormitory we stayed. I was staying on one side, and she was staying on the other side. And we just got a conversation going, and she started sharing what she did, and we also actually found out that we have a few connections. She worked with my brother and sister-in-law for a while when she was teaching. So we found all kinds of connections, but we kind of agreed at that point that there wasn't any obvious connecting points between what Concordia was doing and what she was doing through Lutheran Child and Family Services in Indianapolis, but we really wanted there to be. And so we're still kind of just sharing emails. She lets me know when stuff's going on, even though it probably won't apply to what we're doing here, and vice versa, with the hope and the prayer that one day we'll find some cool connecting points where our ministries can interact. What they're doing in through Lutheran Child and Family Services in Indianapolis is really exciting, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about that. And here, at least in my mind, careful, we're going into my mind, but the way I see this fitting together is we spent the morning talking about this connection, this blending of our life together in our household and our families and how that can blend together in our congregational life. I wanted to with that theme fresh in your mind, I wanted to spend a little time talking about what I would call a vocational gap, where because of broken families, or perhaps even a mom or dad that just aren't at all in the picture, kids don't necessarily have some of the opportunities that we can provide for our children, and how the church, not just can, but how the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod specifically is stepping up to help fill that gap. And the people I know a little bit, I don't know anybody, but that can talk more on this topic than Kathy. So please welcome Ms. Witto to our conference.
Hi, and thank you very much for, as others have said, the invitation. It is such a joy to be able to share my vocation with those who want to hear it. I'm sorry I didn't say this before Pastor started speaking, but let me tell you this. If you cannot read the screen, you might want to move forward. And I know it's a little bit against the Lutheran way, but as we go through, feel free to move as you need to. I know this is after lunch, but I also know that I am somebody who likes to talk with you. So this is going to be a little bit of interactive stuff as we get to it. And so if you can't read the screen, or if you find yourself needing to just raise your hand and ask a question, we'll get that going. And thank you, Dr. Gerby, for reminding all of us there are Bibles in the pews, because I had a hard time scrunching down all the Bible verses that I wanted to share with you into this tiny little PowerPoint. So feel free to use those as we get to that point. My name is Kathy Witto. I work at Lutheran Child and Family Services in Indianapolis. Some of you have heard of that phrase many times before. I can tell you this, I've been here for 2 years, and I have heard all sorts of ideas. Oh yeah, isn't that where they do this? And yeah, my parents were involved in that a while ago, and this is what they did there. And what I've learned is that there are many Lutheran Child and Family Services across the country. I don't know the history, maybe somebody in the room knows it a little bit more than I, but my understanding is every district of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has a Lutheran Child and Family Services, or did at one point, and each district, it's developed in their communities to the needs of their communities. So while I am here and can certainly answer questions about Lutheran Child and Family Services, and you'll hear some of it as I go through and share with you what I've brought along. But really, what I'm talking about today is life together in the perspective from my experience at Lutheran Child and Family Services. And so before we get into this, I was sharing with Pastor Beast a little bit earlier, just before lunch. Being third on the docket has its pros and cons. What I found out this morning, the pros are that I get to listen to what you guys all heard this morning, and kind of really, I was trying not to rework my presentation after I heard what everybody else was saying, but I do want to point out a few things that I did glean from them that I want you to keep in your mind as we're going through this. And then by all means, as questions come up or comments or other connections that you guys found, would be lovely to kind of put that all together. And again, I know I mentioned out loud the benefit of being reminded of the peace that Christ can give us. And not only can, but does. And it is there, even if we're not paying attention to it. But the other thing that when we were working through Romans this morning, there are challenges that we face day in and day out. And one of the challenges that I face in my job daily is the challenges of the lies that we believe, and trying to battle that. And also the challenge of the patience to persist, of making sure that we don't give up on the promises that Christ has already laid at our feet. They are ours for the taking, and they are ours whether we recognize it or not. So those challenges are there, but God has always already worked out a solution. And so let's keep that in mind. The other piece that I gleaned from the Curtises, I love the fact that they're working intergenerationally. That is something that I think in the declining numbers of membership of our dear Lutheran congregations, that is something we can really hold on to and really capitalize on. Because we do have so much history. Who was just giving me a history here? There you are, right there in the front row. Thank you. The history of this congregation alone, let alone every piece of the congregations that we are a member of, and for those of us that have moved from congregation to congregation, even those connections. And as we find out, I mean, who hasn't gone to another Lutheran event and met the brother of a cousin of somebody else that you used to work with, or grew up babysitting, or something to that effect? Those are the connections that we can hang on to. But I do want to also mention, especially in light of what I've learned over the last 2 years working at Lutheran Child and Family Services, when we talk about people that are no longer members of our congregations, or never have been, or choose not to be, we don't want to confuse that non-membership with uninterested in the gospel. I have had so many conversations with people over the years, but surprisingly more so in the job that I have now, that no, never been to church, but I know God. Yeah, I'm interested in going to chapel. Hey, Miss Kathy, I was thinking about this yesterday. What do you think? And that's what we also want to remember in our conversations with those that we're surrounding ourselves with, but also with those that are strangers that we just meet, or might show up at youth group, or might show up on the doorstep. So those are some things that I gleaned from earlier. And as you keep that in mind, let's look at life together. This is the title of the theme. That's got a lot of meat in it. And I know that you may not be able to read all of that stuff on there, but when I saw this visual, I couldn't help but think of the stuff that life is made of. And so you're going to have to deal with this montage of chaos for a few slides here. But life together, your congregation, its families, and dealing with the stuff that gets between. Because there's a lot of stuff out there. Already you know I am not a pastor. And so a little bit different perspective coming in. And because of that, I do not have a congregation of which I am a shepherd or otherwise leading in one direction or another. So I am just one of those that has a voice, as it will be heard or can be placed forward. So when I was looking at this combination in light of me, I really took a look at the congregation as the support system. Some of you may be able to identify your congregation. Some of you have been lifelong congregations of one congregation. And that's where you've raised your children, that's where you've gone to the potlucks, that's where you've cried with people who have lost loved ones, and that's where you have supported one another through celebrations. I've bounced around a few times. You read my bio if you did, and can if you want. But in the end, the congregation for me is really where I find that support. Where I get the sacraments and the word, where I find friends that are like-minded, where I can be reminded of what needs to happen and what direction we need to go. Its families, as per the title, really turns into those you serve. Within a congregation, the pastor, of course, and other church leaders are serving those that come into your congregation. And so, putting it in the general sense, each of us have a role to play in our vocation. Each of us have a role to play in our lives. And we have a support system where we can be encouraged and pushed forward. But then we also are not only able to, but we are commanded to serve. And so put that again in your own perspective, where you see those spheres around you. And there's no better way to define stuff other than life. There's not one of us in this room that doesn't know what I mean when I say stuff is life. We've all dealt with it. We are all currently dealing with it. We all wish that some of it could go away. Thanks be to God, some of it has, and we have recovered from it, and we have moved on from it. But that doesn't mean that tomorrow there won't be something else. And so as we look at these things, your support system, the people that you serve, and the life that gets in the way, I'm going to share some of my stories from the perspective of Lutheran Child and Family Services. It's probably good at this point to give a little bit of background to Lutheran Child and Family Services for those that you don't know it well enough. I did bring some flyers, and it's out in the Commons room in the corner there. Feel free to pick it up. They will be there later because I can't clean it up while I'm speaking, so don't worry. But also, so that some of that is there, and you can take to your own. But basically, this is the elevator pitch. Lutheran Child and Family Services primarily is a ministry to teenagers. Our licensure covers the ages of 6 to 21. The residential program that we have on site is for teenagers that are court-ordered to a program in our facility. It is a 24/7, not 27, but anyway, a 24/7 facility. They're there all the time, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They go to school there. They have their therapists there. We have a nursing program there. I am spiritual life leader there. My job is 3-tiered, so it's long. But long story short is I am there with kids as well. They are court-ordered there because whatever has happened to them, to get them into the court system, where the court is deciding their fate rather than themselves or their families, the court then decides that Lutheran Child and Family Services is the better place for them than going back to their families if their families are able. Well, apparently the court believes their families are not able to go to jail, to go to a mental facility, or to just release them onto their own reconnaissance, which is usually where we got them from in the first place. So, we are dealing with teenagers dealing with life. So, when we put this into perspective, my congregation I am definitely a member of a congregation, but that's not really who knows what's going on. I am a member of Cornerstone Lutheran Church up in Indianapolis. Some of you understand the complexities of that congregation. It used to be Carmel Lutheran Church, and now it has become Cornerstone Lutheran Church with 4 different sites. I attend the congregation that is in the downtown area. The size of the church proper is probably about this, and we worship about 25 in that space on a Sunday. But Cornerstone itself would fit into that 600 plus group of LCMS congregations. So it's a strange kind of place to be together in, because they're all over the place. And so I do find support there, but very few of them understand my job, my role, what happens in my life. So then I look to, well, if my support system is not necessarily my congregation that understands my job, then maybe people at my job understand my job. Well, yeah, but Lutheran Child and Family Services has been around for 140 years. But about 10 years ago, when we decided to continue further into the residential programming, Lutheran Child and Family Services partnered with the hospital, Community Health Network, which is well known, at least in Indianapolis. I do not know if it is statewide. But at that point, the hospital took over the behavioral health end of things and the direct care of the kids on campus. And so, thanks be to God, the board at that time were forward thinking, and they separated the spiritual care for the kids outside of the general operational budget, so that we did have, and now continue to have, control over that spiritual care on campus. But still, the majority of the 200 plus employees are not Lutheran Child and Family Services. They are Community Health Network. And so, and before I got here 2 years ago, there was an 8-month lag in filling the position of spiritual life leader. And so, one would think, I'm a lifelong Lutheran by choice, and love the Lord, and here I come in and say, oh, this is a Lutheran organization, let's go. Well, no, it's not quite. And so, while they certainly respect me and my position, and are appreciative of what I do there for them and for the kids, there is not as much understanding of ministry in that place. And so if you find yourself in that same kind of setting, then the reality is that, for sake of my presentation, the congregation that you are in are those with whom you surround yourself. And that becomes that intentional piece that we heard earlier too. Is how am I going to surround myself with people who know the Lord, who love the Lord, who understand service, who understand the realities of that connection that we need to continue to serve Him as He desires. With that, now families just get all kind of whacked out in what we're looking at here. Those I serve, aside from our own families, which of course is where we begin. Within my job, I am spiritual life leader hired to care for the spiritual needs of the residents and the staff. So there are 200 plus staff. There are 30-ish in our secure residential program. There are 15 to 20 in our open residential program. And then there's an apartment complex across the way that they started a couple of years ago to meet those guys in between, those 18 to 21-year-olds that are just leaving the system and don't have those immediate social services available to them, but also do not have family to go back to. And so this is the beginnings of their independent living at the age of 18 to 21. And so there's about 30 there. So all told, about 70 residents, 200 plus employees, and little old me, helping them out, doing what I can. I don't know any of their families. There is a family unit, obviously exists for each one of them, but not the nuclear family that many of us grew up with and understand as necessary, or at least familiar. The staff at LCFS also kind of spread themselves out. We have the majority that work with our residential program, but then we have people working in the community with home-based services. We have people working in the schools that are doing an intergenerational thing. We have a food pantry that's in Lawrence Township instead of Marion County. And so we've got a lot of different directions that everything's going. And then on top of that, my job is actually three-tiered. Not only am I spiritual life leader, but I am also volunteer coordinator for the people that come and work with the kids directly. So that's another layer of connecting. And I'm also liaison to the community, which brings me to pastors' conferences at Camp Lakeview, and also here to you, to tell people about what goes on and how you can help and how you can pray. And so working with congregations, working with community organizations, working with individuals that just hear about us and call up. In the last couple of months, actually last couple of weeks, I've gotten 3 phone calls from people that said, hey, this is my need. How can you help? And I know pastors get that often too, and some of you in your professions may deal with that same kind of thing. But these are the families that I serve. Take a moment now and think about where your parameters stretch. Not only in your job, in your profession, but in your neighborhood, within your church, in your community. What about your children's friends and their families? What about your neighbors and all of that? How far does it reach? Those are the types of things that we need to consider as we learn life together. Now, there was no other way for me to throw this stuff at you, and this is where you may need to come up because I understand that the background is hard to read through. But I really do want you to take a look at this list. And I know it's crooked and things aren't straight, so that's just the teacher in me. But focus in on 1 or 2 of those that hit you the hardest, or make you question a little bit more. These are the things that get in the way.
Language barriers.
What is an example that you can share about a language barrier?
Buying a mango in Evansville.
Buying a mango in Evansville. A mango is a green pepper,
I believe so.
depending on who you're talking to.
Right.
That would confuse me.
Yes.
And so that language barrier, either you go home with something you didn't want and don't even like, perhaps,
It's been years, but
but you remember that very clearly, and that's another thing, it sticks with you. Or you have to take the time to talk it through and learn and understand where each of us are coming from.
Trauma.
Tell me what you want to say about trauma.
I don't want to say a whole lot. I work at the jail, and in dealing with a lot of the people there, sometimes stuff pops up that it's rooted in their trauma. There are some people that I despise there, that if you look back through their life in the system, that they are the victims of some horrendous trauma, and sometimes that gives me perspective on why they are the way they are and why they react to certain things.
Awesome. Before we leave here together, remind me to mention a book. I can't think of the name off right hand, but I'll be able to, we'll exchange information, and I'll share a book with you that I've read recently about working in a jail and how the challenges are there. I want to say real quick a question or a story about trauma, and then I'll get to your statement. Thank you for your interaction, everybody. What is today? Thursday, just 2 days ago. We call our residential facility is set up in centers or dormitories. So we have 6 centers in our residential facility, 2 of which are being renovated right now, so 4 are filled. And I was on a center and I saw one of the girls sitting in the tightest of corners, farthest away from anybody she could find.
Oh.
And she was rocking and shaking. And I went up to her and we have a good rapport. And I said, "Are you okay?" No response. I was afraid to kind of touch her because I didn't know where she was at and what she was doing, and she could have swung, she could have done with anything. And so I was able to kind of let her know I was there, but still no response. And so I prayed over her a little bit. Then I went to go tell the staff. I said, "I need you to come check on her." And the staff was beautifully addressed it. And she just took it. And basically, she was in a catatonic state because moments before, she had been triggered to the abuse that she had from her father. And she didn't know where she was. After, it took her a while, and the staff and her peers were loving on her and talking her through it, and she came out of it. And I happened to be in the center when she was walking around as if nothing had happened. And I said, "Hey, did you know that I was sitting next to you moments ago?" And she goes, "Oh, no, I didn't." I said, "Well, I prayed over you," and then we just gave each other a hug, and she said thanks. And then she went on with her day. And that's the type of thing that you're right. When we get responses back at us, we don't know where they're coming from. And trauma is a big deal with where I'm working. And to be honest, it's a big deal in all of your conversations with all of the people you run into. Unless you know their story, you don't know why they're reacting the way they do. And it could be something that they don't even understand. But it's a real thing that gets in the way of our conversations with each other. Thanks for your patience. What did you want to say?
Bureaucracy and trust issues. I was a caseworker here in Vanderbilt for about 25 years, and when we went to court, I would tell the caretakers, the parents normally, that if you want your children back or if you want to keep your children, you're going to have to do what the court expects of you. And I said, "I'll help you if you work with me and work with them." And only one time did I have to recommend termination. But there were trust issues sometimes from the bureaucrats because they weren't always on the same page with me. But I thought, if we can help this family, I will, but they have responsibilities. So it never changed. I mean, it was always overload, work, and also trust issues. So I don't know for sure how to overcome that, but yet it's still leaning, and I still remember how hard it was at times.
Yeah.
And I knew that I had to first answer to God how I did my work. But secondly, I was not like with some of these caseworkers because they get information from these families, and then they would show up in court and tell them, "I would not do that. I refused."
Yeah, and yes, the mistrust of bureaucracy can be accurate.
Yes.
It can be blown out of proportion.
Yes.
And when we say bureaucracy, we're already creating a us versus them, as opposed to individuals that are working in these positions. And that's the other piece again, remembering that everybody is an individual rather than a part of the cog of whatever group it is, teenagers, bureaucracy, news media, football players. But truth be told, all of these things are real. And what I hear of these stories that you have shared is that you remember them. No matter how long ago it was, it's memorable because it's hard to shake the pieces that we feel we failed at when we don't even know where it goes.
Thank you.
And so one of these things, all of these things are true. And trust issues and generation gap, I do want to say just a few things. Some of you are well aware of Generation Z. Others of you, let me tell you, it's all those young whippersnappers that think they know what they're doing. Okay? But it is documented that Generation Z, which is basically college age on down, are the most anxious generation in all of history. Trust issues are a real thing for them. And again, we don't want to say all Generation Z fit this category. But when you're working with people that don't trust, you have to be trustworthy.
Yes.
That is one thing. Generation gap doesn't only mean me and those other people I don't understand. Teenagers is a category in itself. When you add trust issues to the regular anxieties of a teenager and an adolescent, that becomes challenging. But the other reality is where I work, I used to be one of the youngest on staff. Not anymore. In fact, I was trying to do the math or trying to figure it out for real. And out of the 200 employees, I probably am in the 10% of the older group at this point. And so the generation gap across, that's another thing that's been well documented too, is this is the first time in history where we have 5 generations working in the same workplace. Now it may not be in your workplace, but 5 generations working together in the same place causes language barriers, logistics, bureaucracy. What used to be done is no longer done, and so that switches things up. So you don't just have to be working with teenagers to know that there are challenges as you go. The reality is that when you break it down, you start to see it a little bit more clearly. The support we need is clear. If we're going to live together, we need the support to help us do that. Now, nobody's going to argue with me, but I bet you everybody can debate about it. First and foremost, we need the support of God. How do we get there? What do we do about it? How does it happen? We've heard that already earlier. All of us are here because we understand we need God. And so there's not a lot to point that out. But the reality is this. This is one of my favorite verses, 2 Timothy 1:7. Go ahead and look it up in your Bible if you can't see it up here. And I didn't get to put everything, I didn't put the whole passage up there, but some of you know it well enough. I learned it in the RSV, and so it wasn't fear, it was timidity. I think I like both of them. But God did not give us a spirit of timidity or a spirit of fear. Does anybody know it by heart and want to complete that? But a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. Life can be scary. The communication connections can be scary. Do I talk to this teenager or this coworker or this person that I'm serving that I just don't get along with can be scary. But God did not give us a spirit of fear, or didn't say be timid, back away, don't get involved. He said, no, you have a spirit of power, because that power comes from the love that God first gave us, that He allows us to give to others, and of self-control, self-discipline. Again, those conscientious decisions to make things as they should be. The other reality is we can't do it alone. Absolutely not. I don't care how many times somebody says, just pull yourself up, get over it, make it happen. You be you. It hurts me. I love these kids, but they have so many ideas about how they're supposed to do it. And sometimes they are willing to listen to me, and I appreciate that. But we can't do it alone. I'm going to throw these out there. You know this one, of course, from Genesis 2:18. Not good that the man should be alone. So God created a partner for man. But I only put a few up here, and you guys are going to be able to come up with a whole lot more, so shout them out as you go. Some of you remember that Moses was saying, God, I can't do this alone. And God said, I know you can't. Here, take 70 more people with you and get your job done. Some of you remember this, but we always know of the 12 disciples. We forget that there were like 72, 150, 396. You know, there were disciples all over the place that Jesus said, go do this. You know, take my word and take it elsewhere. Who else can remember stories about help from Scripture?
In Acts, when the church sets up
That's right.
the other helpers, Stephen and the other.
True that.
Simon.
Yeah, the beginnings of the church after the resurrection. Anybody else? Think right now of who is your support. Who is that first person you call when you say, oof, I need help? Parents, okay? And write it, oh good, your helpmate. That's awesome. Yeah, your immediate family.
Think of it, I believe it's in 2 Timothy when St. Paul is writing and he says, send Mark because he's helpful to me.
Yeah.
Which is, because Paul, of course, his letters give this impression of a lot of, like, just kind of he's very independent and strong, but you see in other sections like that how he's so dependent on all of these people with him.
Yeah. And even, I'm in a Bible study looking at Philippians right now, and just the partnership in the gospel, even though he is independent, traveling alone and in jail all by himself, but he's relying on these connections that he's made over the years. So even if your parents are no longer here to rely on them, or even if your best friend is 5 states over and you don't get to see them all the time, these are the connections that we can hold on to. The other piece about support, I don't know why I put that in there, just looking at it now, it makes me kind of laugh. But the support we need, I think I just had to put the succinct thing down, is that the work is never done. Doesn't mean, man, we've got too much to do, we gotta keep going, we can't stop, we gotta make it happen. The work is never done is more along the lines of we can't become complacent. Look at this, we got 25 people coming to the youth group. This is great. All we gotta do is just do the same thing year after year and it'll be fine. They'll keep coming. Or my relationship with my spouse or my kids or my neighbors are pretty chill. You know, maybe we'll skip that barbecue this year. Or I don't need to write a letter to that person right now. We're pretty good. But we can't become complacent as we are seeking that support or think that that support is helping us to be able to do it better on our own. That is another piece. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. If you want to look up the whole thing, it's Colossians 3:16 and 17. And it's definitely, whatever you do it all in the name of the Lord. And that is where we need to stick when we are learning what has to happen. The people we serve, of course, is a whole nother layer. Without that support, you know, by the time lunch comes, you're tired of people, right? And yeah, holy cow, it is amazing. I really have to do a shout out to God right now because as a teacher, I was a teacher for 32 years in the classroom, and most people understand that in a classroom setting, you've got bells and schedules and the kids come and go, and I did teach at a high school, so I didn't have kids all day long. I mean, I did, but I didn't have the same kids all day long. So 45 minutes with this group of kids, I could probably handle it. It's okay. Coming into this job of spiritual life leader at Lutheran Child and Family Services, number one, I kind of had to make up the job description. I kind of had to decide how I was going to serve. And the days are ridiculous because every time you walk in, somebody wants to either play catch with you, or somebody wants to pray the rosary with you, or somebody just wants to yell at you for not being there yesterday. But whatever it is, there's stuff going on. And because it's a 24/7 facility, and I am also spiritual care leader for the staff, I figured, well, somewhere along the line, I'm going to have to get to know the people that spend the night here. And I don't want to spend the night here. So how is that going to work? So I've created a schedule for myself, and I admit it's my own fault. But for 2 days a week, I get there at 6:30 a.m. and leave anywhere between 2 and 6 p.m. 2 days a week, I'm there kind of a 9 to 5 schedule-ish, so I can be there at the shift huddle in the middle of the day. And 2 days a week, I'm there kind of second shift, for those of you who understand that lingo. About, I don't know, anywhere from 2 to 4 I show up, and then I leave at midnight. And so, yeah, my brain at this age is not as easily kept up with that. But I started that story by saying I got to give a shout out to God. Because you can imagine that schedule. You can imagine trying to keep track of 200 employees and 70 kids. But there are days when I'm there for 15 hours and I go home refreshed because of the conversations I've had and the pieces of the puzzle that God puts together for why I'm there. And that's how God does it. So the people we serve are not a byproduct. It is the purpose. But when we're looking at this, that's the part that we need to be intentional about so that this works well and within God's design. First and foremost, remember that you serve. You serve a God who is love, and you serve people who are his children. We see this here in Joshua 24:15. As for me and my house, what is Joshua going to do? Amen. You do what you do you. I'm going to do me. And me is serving a God who knows me and loves me. But this is from Luke 10:37. And some of you know it automatically, the one who showed mercy, but I would encourage you to look it up if you don't remember that story. In Luke 10, this is the who is my neighbor, Jesus. And he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And at the end, in the teaching moment, he says, so, which of those three were a neighbor to this gentleman? And this is the answer that the Pharisee gave. The one that showed mercy? You bet. So we are here to serve. We are here to serve our Lord, and we are here to serve our neighbor. That is where we're at. The other thing to keep in mind is that no two situations are the same. No two families are the same. No two court dates are the same. No two twins are the same. I have a twin brother, by the way, so I know a little bit about that. Nothing is the same. Look at the differences between these groups of people that God served and loved regardless. 12 disciples, Mary and Martha, Jacob and Esau. Can you think of any other kind of opposite groups that were together that the Lord served? Maybe Pharisees and Sadducees?
Moses and Aaron.
I had them up there and then chose to take them down, so thanks for remembering.
David and Saul.
Oh, goodness, yes. Okay. Both of them, handpicked by God himself.
Isaac and
Ishmael. Isaac and Ishmael. Okay. No two situations are the same. We, as our Lord, need to look at each one as an individual situation. Yes, we can learn from other situations, but we cannot expect the same results from where we're going. And this one always stretches beyond the immediate. I couldn't come up with a good, well, I shouldn't say, I probably came up with about 10 different Bible passages, but wanted to put it succinctly. But always stretches beyond the immediate. And let me try to explain that before I throw the Bible verse at you. Nothing happens in a vacuum. You know this. You are affected by your cousin's child's surgery that's next week. Okay? They might not even live here. But you're thinking about them, you're praying about them, you know the challenges that that family is having, and so you want to do something. The child that I told you about that was cowering in a corner, she's affected, she doesn't even know what will trigger her into that state sometimes. She knows what she can try to avoid. But nothing is in a vacuum. Everything always stretches past the immediate, whether it is time or space. The thing that I pointed to is the Exodus, chapter 20, verses 5 and 6. Some of you again know this. Visiting the iniquity of the third and fourth generation, but showing blessing to thousands of generations to those who fear. And so, both blessing and curse extend beyond this one situation. Some of you in your own families have had to deal with incarceration or family separating, the surprise death of a family member. All of those things happen here, but stretch all around. And that's another piece about understanding the people we serve. It's more than just this incident. It's the history that brought it up to there, and it's the hope or the distrust of the future that's going to happen next. And so how do we live life together in the midst of those crazinesses? I don't even know when we started or when I'm supposed to be done. I think this is the original time of when I'm supposed to stop talking. I don't know either. So let me at least do this. I've got a couple of stories to kind of put it into perspective. Detroit Tigers were the last two words in my bio. It is absolutely not possible to explain how big of a Tiger fan I am. Some of you that know baseball understand that this last month was incredibly exciting. Will you look at that? Did you see that? They made it! And then they beat them! But not Cleveland. But because I am a huge fan of baseball, and the Detroit Tigers are my team, and to be fair, and it's crazy, I have a dear friend who is a Cleveland fan. I lived in New York for many years, and I finally found New York fans that I like. And I rooted for the Mets while I lived in New York because they're the same colors and the same hard luck story. And I actually have friends that live in LA, so I was reading about the Cleveland Indians, and Guardians. See how far back a fan I am? I was reading about the Guardians, and I was really glad I did because I started to like them a little bit more than the team that just beat us. But basically, there was a question of Stephen Kwan, who is their center fielder, and he was asked, so how do you go into this game that could have been an elimination? It was game 5 of the Tiger Guardian series, and this was his answer. He didn't go in to say, yeah, we're going to beat up the other guys so we can prove we're good. Or, nobody else thought we were coming, so we're going to make it. He says this, obviously playing for another day to hang out with everybody and just be next to all of your boys. I think that's going to be the biggest driving factor. Yeah, they're looking for a ring. But what they want to do is play baseball with their buddies. If we want to go in and just play baseball with our buddies, it's going to be a whole lot easier to serve one another than to try to work out an agenda. This also I want to share with you. I asked the kids that I serve, what do you think it means to live comfortably and safely in community with others? The first one, well, this wasn't the first one, but it was one of them, and it's the first first one I'm sharing with you. I love this answer because this is all he wrote. Soft blankets and support.
Yeah.
That's a teenage kid, by the way, that said soft blankets and support. So we all know Linus. We know that his blanket is soft, and it is a support to him. But these are the other answers, and I want you to just read through them and kind of see, get the perspective of these kids that really sometimes come to us with nothing. This is what it means to them to live safely in community with others.
You've been very unusual to ask that question, dear. I appreciate that. I've never seen any worker ask that question to any child.
Well, I did tell them I was coming to speak to all of you guys. And I needed some answers, but
This is very good.
yeah, I agree. They came through for me.
I think, because I work with kids that experience trauma, and I think that once you have perspective or preconceived
Notions, yeah.
people that go through trauma, you know, especially the kid, I mean more than just kids, they're combative, right? They come at you and it's always loud, it's always, you know, and you're like, and so yeah, they want peace, right?
Yeah.
And quiet. So people get these preconceived, this kid's a terrible kid because it's loud and combative. No, that's just they're normal, even adults that are like
Yeah.
that, which I'm sure you've been in jail.
Mhm.
No, that's just their level constantly.
Yeah.
And so you can't, you know, it's a terrible preconceived notion that people have when they see
Yeah.
people reacting like that. And I just want to say, think about why they're screaming and yelling and think about where it's coming from. Don't think about
Yeah.
the moment right now.
And if you haven't heard this yet, it will be good for you to keep it in mind when you run into a loud, combative person. One of the things in trauma-informed care over the last decade or so as it has entered into the mainstream, one of the things that is important for us to keep in mind is instead of asking the question, what's wrong with you? You're not doing things like normal people do. Instead of asking what's wrong with you, even if we don't ask it out loud, we ask it of ourselves. What happened to you? What has gotten you to the point of immediate reaction or completely shutting down with what seems to me a fine conversation? And so it does put us in a different perspective to be able to engage, or at the very least not become equally offended when we're responding. And that's true.
People
There
want to
are,
respond. They want to
yeah.
fire with fire. You didn't know you got your water.
Haven't we learned that over the last 150 million years? That doesn't work. I tried to connect some of these to what we were talking about earlier, but because of time, I do want to. I will share this and then talk about joy at the very end. This is. I don't know how many of you have tried to put PowerPoints together, but every time I look for a face, I always get the canned, like the actors trying to look disgusted or trying to look happy or trying to be a happy family together. I needed a picture of doubt and distrust, and I thank the Lord that there was a real picture online for me to be able to use. Because here's the story of another resident who's been with us maybe about a month, and for all intents and purposes, when they are assigned here, they stay for about 6 to 9 months. So she's relatively new, and with every new person that comes in, I have a spiritual life assessment conversation with them. Ask them, what do they know about God? Do they go to church? Do they want to do stuff here with me? It's get to know you, and then it goes in their file, and then I work with them throughout their time. She wanted nothing to do with the spiritual life leader. She didn't need it. It was fine. And believe me, everything there is optional, including their medication. So I back away and say, okay, we'll talk to you later. She would allow me to say hi, and we'd have kind of just that. And every once in a while, I try to encourage her along those lines. She, only a couple weeks ago, A staff member came to me and asked the random question, what kind of Bibles do you have here? Well, I've got these 4 versions of the Bible, and as I normally do, what is your real question? Turns out she was talking with this resident, and this resident asked her for a Bible, not me. And so the staff and I talked, and I said, well, I'll go talk to her and find out what's going on. So I went to this girl, and I said, I hear you're looking for a Bible. And she said, no. I said, come on. I just talked to this staff member, and she told me you guys had this conversation. She goes, okay, except for I want a real Bible. I don't want the fake Bible. I'm like, okay. So in the conversation we had, I found out what Bible she needed, and thanks be to God I had that. And so we worked it out. For whatever reason, it took about another week before I could get the Bible to her. And I was really wondering if she still continued to distrust me. But when I brought her the Bible, I said, here you go. She didn't even look at me, but the first thing she said was she pointed to another staff member and she goes, look, I have a Bible. And in my mind, I said, thanks be to God. I didn't laugh at her or point out to her that I told you so. But about a couple days ago, she was walking through the courtyard coming from a visitation, I don't know with whom. She had her Bible in hand, and when she saw me, she said, look, I have my Bible. I said, well, awesome. That's so exciting. And the reality of all of that is, remember you serve, because you don't know where it's going to go. I've got kids that are coming in and out, and sometimes they are locked in and they want to do chapel every week and they want to be involved, and others come and go without really saying hi or bye. But some of you know this acronym. You know, offhand. A couple months ago, I invited the kids to be part of a chapel planning committee. I thought maybe 5 kids would be interested enough to work with me weekly. 20 kids showed up.
Oh, wow.
And since then, I don't have the time to plan chapel every week with all these kids. So we've turned it into a monthly thing. And every time I walk in, at least once a week, if not 3 times a week, I've got kids saying, when are we doing chapel planning? When is that coming next? When do we get to talk about that? In one of our chapel planning things, when we look at the lessons and prepare what they hear God telling them, it turned out that I was able to give them this acronym. And they agreed that if you keep Jesus first, and you think of others next, and you keep yourself last on the totem pole, then joy is the result. Not only joy in your own life, but joy in life together. So I would encourage you to remember that the work is never done this side of heaven. So keep it going. Do I stick up here for questions or are
Well,
we
let me
joining us
see.
together?
It is almost 2:30. If you guys think you can hang on without a break, then I think rather than, let's just open it up for questions for both of our speakers that are still here. Is that okay? Can we do that? Okay. I can move, let me move this out of the way and I'll grab
Do
2
we need
chairs that are over here.
this collectively in the middle of the table for both of us?
I'm not that worried about it.
Okay.
We were the farm team borrowed the 220. Evan's on
You were?
the triplets.
Oh, the triplets, yeah, that's
Huh.
right.
But they're not around anymore.
No.
No, now it's a whole different group.
They're able.
Well, I mean, thanks for bringing up baseball because in August, I got to go with my niece to a Indianapolis Indians game where they were playing the Toledo Mud Hens, which is currently the AAA affiliate of the Tigers. And all of our big league boys were playing in Toledo still. So we got to watch them on the field. And then the next week they were playing in Detroit.
70s, 80s. It's
That's not bad.
Well, I've been a fan since the mid-'70s, so
oh gosh.
I know, it's kind of crazy.
Grab a seat. turn this off?
Oh, yeah.
'Cause I'm
You don't want to get offended. It's-
I was gonna say, if anybody was dying to ask Pastor Curtis a question, but is disappointed that he left, since I'm his doppelganger, you know, just ask me and
You
I
can
can
channel
probably
him.
answer it,
This seems like a good opportunity for revenge, to be honest. Yeah, we want to open it up to any questions that you all have. Yes, ma'am.
I know your job is very stressful. You don't talk about the stress that comes from that job, but I know that it is. So what do you do to, I wouldn't take vacations even the last 3 years of my job. I'm sorry for that. What do you do in your spare time to make sure you're okay while you work with others?
Thank you for reminding me to do so. One of the challenges, I've been at this job for 2 years, and because I had several different jobs over the last 32 years, and I know by experience it takes 3 years to get used to a new place. I'm 2 years in. So thanks be to God, I am less stressed now than I was 2 years ago. I am starting to remember to take vacations. One of the things that when you are a teacher, vacations are handed to you on a platter. And so one of the things I'm getting used to is that when I'm gone, my job doesn't get done. It's not that I have a staff that will be able to fill in for Bible study or chapel. I have to beg, borrow, and steal volunteers and all the rest of that stuff. So my heart, it's hard for me to leave because of that. But God is definitely providing ways to do
Very
that.
important. I've
Yeah.
got the hard way, dear
And,
friends.
and what I said earlier, it is one of the blessings of the joy of ministry, is that on those days where, God will fulfill you in the middle of the crazy stress. And those are the things that I do rely on right now. But I'm doing better.
Good,
Thanks for asking.
good, thank you.
How is it decided where a child should go, county versus the Lutheran? And what, I'm just curious as to what the turnaround time is from the day they come, because you're ministering to 70 kids, and I've got 3 kids in Indianapolis. It's insane. So I can imagine like a wait list of anything. Do
Yeah.
they come from the county also, or?
And to be fair, I am not a part of the clinical team. I just show up to work and there for those that are there. But what I do know is that every child has a team, and that team has to be in communication constantly. We actually service because a large portion of our population are trafficked kids, and we work with an organization that actually we're getting some from Illinois now. And so not only is it within Indiana, across the whole state, so every county, every place is different, but now we're also working with Illinois laws and regulations as well. And so it really is, there's probably at least 5 people on every child's team that has to be on the same page, but ultimately it is up to the court to decide where they're going. So.
And then the families are also getting support where?
Those that have families in the picture, there is family therapy as well. Sometimes it is combined with the kids, sometimes it's separate, depending on that relationship. Sometimes the families are not mother and father, but grandparents or aunt and uncle or older sibling. Sometimes the families are incarcerated or deceased, and therefore we're working with foster families, adoptive families, and those types of things.
I don't mean to be the only one, but these people are so interesting. We talked a little bit about how to help teenagers. I have to be honest with you. I have a hard time working with teenagers because I'm learning to expect a bad attitude, and sometimes they surprise me they got a good one. So could you tell me how I could best work through this? I don't want to label people, and I've fought hard not to label, but I've seen too many out of our teenagers. I know they're unhappy, and then they show it, and I want them to be happy, and they don't show it. So what can we do about this?
Are you asking?
Yes, sir, you were
Okay.
telling me, I think that you work with the teens or encourage that.
Well, just kind of generally in the pastoral situation, I know a lot of teenagers interact with them. I think there's a couple things going on here. Part of how a teenager acts depends quite a bit on how they just their experience growing up, right? So, I mean, there's a sense in which you have to minister to teenagers already when they're little children. You know, are we as parents, are we demonstrating the love and provision for the children, you know, that they need, right? And I've noticed that when that's the situation, you know, when a child grows up in a home where they have parents and they have support networks, or you know, even if they don't have both of their parents, right? If there are other people who are kind of stepping in there and acting as father and mother figures, that can go a long way for them. You know, having a good, having an engaging attitude and personality when they turn, you know, 13, 15, 17.
So they gotta be reached early.
Yeah. Now, I mean, the other, so that's, you know, for the church, then the question, what does the church do? So that's where, as a church, we can already step in to help to be supportive of young children where maybe there isn't, they don't have both parents at home, right? Where maybe there's some kind of, it's not the kind of traditional family that we're used to, right? And so as congregational members, we can help in that situation. Then on the other hand, right, you have, to some degree or another, where there wasn't that relationship of love and provision and respect that was established. So then that's when you might see more of this kind of, and really, I mean, if a teenager has a bad attitude, what does that mean? It probably means there's some kind of fear or, there's some kind of anxiety about what they're entering. You know, they realize they're entering into adulthood, and they don't have the networks, they don't have the kind of education, maybe we can even say, to enter into that, right? And so that's where, you know, again, depending on the level of fear or concern, you know, there's going to be different ways. Obviously, when you have very difficult situations, you know, Kathy can say more about that. You know, if you have kind of more mild or moderate situations, it's just that, I think what Pastor Curtis was saying this morning, of just recognizing the need for teenagers to be able to kind of have that peer socialization of learning how to become a Christian as teenagers, but then also that intergenerational engagement.
Thank you, engage, connect, thank you.
Yeah. But you surely have
I
other
think
things to say.
the biggest thing that I have learned in dealing with teenagers my career is really just being trustworthy, as I mentioned earlier, being available. If we're going in with an agenda, they're going to see that. I know you had mentioned that earlier. You know, the kids know what's going on, and to be honest and real with them, even if it is just, okay, I get that you don't want to do this, but I am, you know, I'm trying to get through this, and this is how I need this next 10 minutes to go, and then we can deal with what you've got. Those are the types of things that are just being honest in our relationships with them. But yeah, and depending on that situation, if it is a designed program where the frustration is, then help everybody understand what the program is for. If it continues to be a problem, then maybe rethink the programming and work with, you know, from a different angle. But if it's just a conversation you're having with them, then yeah, just try to be present, try to get to know them, and that becomes an easier way to connect.
Thank you.
The other thing I'd throw in is just kind of going back to the original, Dr. Bergen's original presentation and thinking in terms of vocation, because you're right, I mean, they're not dumb, they're insightful, and they see what's real and what's not. And I think part of the problem sometimes is we're not really clear on what our role or our responsibility is in relationship to them. You know, so we kind of try to be what they want us to be instead of what God's called us to be for them. And I think that comes across as disingenuous. Not because we're not sincere, but because we're not really sure what we're trying to do. You know, I think, again, just something as simple as in our small catechism, the table of duties, the getting a clear sense of here's what God has called me to do, here's my role. Again, I want to point out, and we've kind of covered two, I think it was important, I really wanted to do this, but we leaned in the morning real heavily on vocation, and especially the vocation of parents. But this afternoon we wanted to recognize that not everybody, there are vocational gaps for a variety of reasons. In other situations, we do need programs. We do need to create programs. But the whole purpose of the programs is to try to fill the gaps so that they can have something that's sort of like a parent, right?
Family.
I mean, ultimately, when and where we can, what we want to do is we want to support family.
Thank you.
Holly, you had it. Sorry, don't remember.
The young adult living facilities that you have, how long have you had those facilities open? Has that been something that had for a long
Depending
time?
on which one you're talking about, Lutheran Child and Families.
18, and you don't just throw them back on the street, 18 that they're living.
Yeah, that apartment complex has been around just over 2 years.
Yeah.
So,
Does
yeah.
CFS do that? Do they have, I've not heard of that before, like you're only these independent, like Lutheran Child Family Services, are you the only ones that have that sort of
no,
facility?
but, and to be fair, I can't point to them elsewhere, but yeah, across the state, across the nation, there are plenty of homes that are filling in the gaps, but each of them does things a little bit differently. I mean, we need that as a society for ages 0 through 21, and to be fair, even beyond. So there are things called group homes, there are things called independent living homes, there are things so everything is different. Lutheran Child and Family Services of Indiana is not the only one that does it, but they are the only ones I know enough